The young and the restless spoilers shock Ian Ward had been biding his time for weeks, silently watching from the shadows as Tessa navigated her days. He had to be careful. He knew that if anyone recognized him, especially Mariah, everything would fall apart. Discretion was key. For Ian, the stakes were high. He had no intention of settling for half measures. He wanted revenge, and he wanted it to cut deep. It all began when he discovered Tessa often stayed at home alone, caring for a baby, her daughter with Mariah. It was almost too perfect, the way fate had aligned these circumstances. Ian's mind spiraled with possibilities: the helplessness of a young mother isolated from her partner, the vulnerability of the infant who couldn't protect itself, and the far-reaching emotional devastation that would follow. He pictured the agony on Mariah's face when she realized not only had her child been taken, but that Tessa, too, was held captive and forced to care for their baby under nightmarish conditions. He could practically taste the bitterness of Mariah's regret and despair, and it fueled him forward. But this plan needed to be perfect, seamless. He couldn't just barge in and snatch them both, not in broad daylight, not without a meticulously crafted approach. Tessa was no fool, and she was fiercely protective. If something felt off, she would call for help in an instant. That meant Ian would have to create a scenario, a persona that allowed him to get close enough without raising suspicion. His first attempt was to pose as a homeless man, lingering around the neighborhood with a disheveled coat, grimy hands, and downcast eyes. He imagined that Tessa, with her gentle heart, might approach him, offer a meal, or at least ask if he was okay. Yet day after day, she walked by him without so much as a second glance. She was always in a hurry, coming back from the grocery store, strolling the baby in a carriage, or stepping out to bring the trash cans in. She kept her head down, her mind focused on her own private world. If Ian tried to force a conversation, he might tip her off. He needed someone better suited to gain Tessa's trust. That was where Jordan came into play. Jordan, who had a knack for reading people, who could slide into a stranger's life like a key in a lock, seemed the ideal candidate. This woman could transform from a gregarious neighbor into a sympathetic confidant in no time. Jordan was everything Ian was not: disarming, approachable, and naturally warm. Tessa might rebuff a strange, unkempt man muttering on the sidewalk, but a friendly woman? Someone who shared a casual smile and a compliment about the baby's shoes, or laughed about the unpredictable weather in Genoa City? That could work. Ian recognized that Jordan, who had dabbled in morally dubious endeavors before, was well-versed in subtle manipulation. She could form a bond with Tessa, learn her routines, and offer a sympathetic shoulder whenever Tessa's eyes held that telltale exhaustion of new motherhood. The challenge for Ian was to convince Jordan to help him. After all, what he planned was more than just deception, it was a felony of the highest order, kidnapping a mother and her child. But Ian was persuasive, especially when he dangled promises of wealth, influence, and a future beyond the drab existence that Jordan currently endured. He appealed to her vanity and her desire for a fresh start. He laid out the plan piece by piece, highlighting her role as the linchpin. If Jordan could infiltrate Tessa's life, stop by with a borrowed cup of sugar excuse, offer to babysit in an emergency, or join her on a walk through the neighborhood, then the groundwork would be laid. The moment Tessa let her guard down, they could strike. Of course, none of this would come easily. Tessa might be cautious. She might hesitate to open her door to a stranger, no matter how pleasant. That's why Jordan needed to be relentless but subtle, using each interaction to build trust. She could casually mention that she lived a few blocks away, perhaps claiming she had just moved into town. She could talk about her own daughter or niece, someone else to help Tessa feel less alone in her motherhood journey. If Tessa believed she had found a friend, someone who understood the demands of caring for a baby in isolation, she might invite Jordan in for coffee one morning. And once Jordan was inside, opportunities would multiply. Ian spent nights fine-tuning his script. He wrote hypothetical dialogues in his head, imagining how Jordan would respond if Tessa asked about her family, her past, her job. He wanted everything to sound natural, yet unremarkable. The key was that nothing about Jordan's story should stand out too much. Too many details could unravel under scrutiny. Instead, Jordan would present herself as an easygoing neighbor who just happened to find Tessa interesting, kind, and worth befriending. In this way, day by day, Jordan would gather intel. She would learn whether Tessa kept the doors locked, when Mariah was expected to return, and how often visitors came by. She might even discover if there were security cameras in the hallway or if the neighbors were nosy. All of this information would be critical when the time came to carry out Ian's ultimate objective. Ian's intention remained chillingly clear: he would abduct both Tessa and the baby, confining them in a place of his choosing. Tessa would have no choice but to care for her daughter under his watchful and malicious eye. He wouldn't bother trying to raise the child himself, he had no interest in that. This was about control, about punishment, about making Mariah's life a living hell. He wanted Mariah to wake up every day haunted by the knowledge that her family was out there somewhere, trapped and terrified. He wanted to prove that betrayal came with unimaginable consequences. Yet as the plan took shape, he recognized its complexity. Any small mistake, a neighbor who remembered Ian's face, a slip of the tongue from Jordan, a moment of suspicion from Tessa, could derail everything. He needed to coordinate the moment of the actual kidnapping with military precision. He had to consider escape routes, transportation, and a secret location. He had to ensure that Tessa, though frightened, would have no immediate means of rescue. He would remove their cell phones, block the windows, and soundproof the room if necessary. He wanted no screams to reach the outside world. Once they were locked away, he could begin his twisted game of psychological torment. The thought exhilarated him. He imagined Tessa's pleas, the baby's cries, and Mariah's frantic search once she realized something was terribly wrong. He savored the idea of making demands through cryptic messages, or perhaps sending a small piece of evidence that he had them, just to see the panic flicker in Mariah's eyes. The more he considered it, the more perfectly evil it seemed. But first, he had to rely on Jordan's skill. If Jordan could become Tessa's ally, if she could plant the seeds of trust and make Tessa believe she had found a friend in an otherwise lonely world, then the next phase would be easy. Tessa would let her guard down at exactly the wrong moment, and Ian would be ready. So he waited, watching from the distance as Jordan made her initial moves. She strolled by the apartment building one afternoon, looking casual and approachable. She carried a tote bag full of groceries, pausing by the steps as Tessa maneuvered the stroller up the small incline. Jordan offered a kind smile, then a few words about how difficult those steps could be with a stroller. Tessa glanced at her for a moment, unsure, but nodded politely. The seed was planted. Next time, maybe Jordan would say a bit more, ask if Tessa lived nearby, and mention that she'd recently moved in down the street. They would laugh together about the broken sidewalk or the unreliable mailman. Little by little, Tessa might find herself looking forward to these chance encounters, and perhaps, one day, Tessa would invite Jordan inside for a quick chat or let her hold the baby while she fetched a diaper. All the while, Ian would remain in the background, orchestrating each stage like a conductor guiding a symphony. He felt confident that with time, patience, and the right manipulation, he would get what he wanted. He would break Mariah's spirit by holding the two beings she cherished most captive and unreachable. This was no impulsive crime, it was a carefully engineered campaign of terror. And as each piece fell into place, Ian savored the anticipation. Soon, he thought. Soon, Tessa and the baby would be in his grasp. And Mariah would know the true cost of her betrayal. Tessa awoke with a start, her heart thudding in her chest as her eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light. She felt disoriented, as if she'd been asleep for ages, her mind thick with confusion and panic. The space around her was unsettlingly quiet, save for the soft buzz of distant machinery. She tried to lift her head, wincing at the dull ache radiating along her temples. It took her a moment to recall what had happened. The memory rushed back in a flood of adrenaline. Someone had grabbed her. There had been strong arms, a cloth against her face, and the muffled cries of her daughter. Aria. Her baby. Where was Aria? Tessa called out, voice raw and urgent, Aria. Aria, sweetheart, where are you? Her words echoed off rough, cold walls. No answer. Only silence. She tried to stand, but her legs shook as she pushed herself up on trembling hands and knees. There was a single door, a steel slab with heavy hinges, and beyond that, she could discern no hint of the world she knew. No windows, no natural light. She reached for a wall to steady herself, feeling around for a switch or a handle. Instead, she found a small, round light fixture bolted into the ceiling. A single bulb glowed weakly overhead, casting awkward shadows on cracked concrete. Her stomach knotted with fear. How long had she been unconscious? Where was this place? And where was her child? Panic clawed at her as she imagined the worst, Aria, alone and frightened, crying in some other locked room. Tessa had heard that sometimes kidnappers separated parent and child, using the mother's love as leverage. She felt sick thinking that someone could be so cruel. No sooner had this terror settled in her mind than a muffled sound reached her ears, a baby's cry. It was distant but unmistakable. Aria's voice, wailing in protest, as if calling out for her mother. Tessa's heart soared and sank at the same time, relief that Aria was alive and horror that they were still separated. She pressed her ear to the door, straining to make sense of what lay beyond. The crying grew louder, then softened, then approached again, as if Aria were being carried down a hallway. Abruptly, there was the scrape of a lock, and the heavy door swung open with a jarring metallic sound. Tessa squinted as two figures stepped inside, silhouettes against a dim corridor light, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other slight and wiry, each face concealed behind a mask of plain black fabric. Tessa's instincts flared. She reached out, trembling, and pleaded, "Please, give me my baby. Don't hurt her, please." She had never felt so vulnerable, so desperate. Before she could say another word, the taller figure carried Aria forward. The baby's cries were shrill and frantic, but the moment Tessa touched her child's tiny form, she felt a surge of fierce protection well up inside her. Aria pressed her face into Tessa's neck, still sobbing, but at least mother and daughter were together again. Tessa looked up at the intruders, willing strength into her voice despite her fear. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from us?" Her voice echoed in the small space, sounding braver than she felt. The two kidnappers exchanged a glance. Then, as if choreographed, the smaller one reached up to remove the mask. Slowly, the black cloth slipped away, revealing a face Tessa would never have expected to see here and now, Ian Ward. She knew of him, of course. The name struck fear into the hearts of many who had crossed paths with him. He had been a looming presence in Mariah's past, a figure of manipulation and cruelty. And now, here he was, stripping away any veneer of kindness or mercy. "We're enemies," Ian said coldly, his lips curving into a thin smile. His eyes held a predatory gleam, one that sent a chill down Tessa's spine. "Isn't that right, Tessa?" His voice dripped with satisfaction, as though he relished every ounce of fear he saw in her face. She gritted her teeth. "What do you think you'll accomplish by kidnapping me and my daughter? Mariah will never stand for this. The police will find us, and they'll lock you both away for the rest of your miserable lives." At the sound of Mariah's name, a flicker of something, anger, triumph, passed over Ian's features. He glanced toward his accomplice, who still had her mask on. With a careless tug, the woman revealed herself, sweeping the mask off in one smooth motion. Jordan. The very same Jordan who had once seemed so harmless, so unremarkable. The one who must have played a part in gaining Tessa's trust or at least scouting her routines. Jordan smiled broadly, her grin strangely cheerful for such a grim occasion, and let out a mocking laugh. "The police," she echoed. "Out here, they wouldn't know where to start looking. Besides, by the time they figure out anything, we'll be long gone." Ian joined in the laughter, the sound resonating cruelly in the cramped space. He stepped back toward the door. "I think you'll find it difficult to reach anyone. There's no signal down here. No one can hear you scream. No one even knows where you've gone." Tessa narrowed her eyes and pulled Aria closer. The baby's crying had subsided into whimpers, little hiccuping sobs that tugged at Tessa's heart. She had to stay calm, for Aria's sake. She had to think, to plan, to find a way out. Jordan watched her closely, her gaze sharp. You see, Tessa, this isn't a simple robbery or a spur-of-the-moment crime. This is personal. Ian wants what he wants, and you and that baby girl are the perfect leverage. You don't know what Mariah took from him, what your family cost him. But you will. You'll see the lengths Ian is willing to go to make sure Mariah suffers. Tessa's blood boiled. Mariah never did anything to deserve this. She's a good person. And I swear, one way or another, you'll pay for hurting us. But her captors only laughed harder, as though the sound of her fury amused them. Without another word, Ian signaled to Jordan, and together they stepped back out into the corridor. The door slammed shut, and Tessa heard the scrape of a bolt sliding into place, then a lock clicking home. Metal against metal. She was sealed inside this underground prison with her daughter, isolated from any hope of rescue. She wasted no time. Tessa shifted Aria into the crook of one arm and dug with her free hand into her pocket, searching for her phone. Her heart fluttered with a frail hope, maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to call for help. She pressed the power button, relief and dread mingling as the screen lit up. She navigated to her contacts, ready to call the police, or Mariah, or anyone who could help. But when she checked the bars of reception, there were none. Her phone stubbornly displayed no service. She tried once more, holding the device higher, angling it toward the ceiling, anything to catch a stray signal. Nothing. Aria began to fuss again, her tiny arms flailing as if to protest the grim surroundings. Tessa hushed her softly, whispering calming words, forcing herself to remain steady. She took a moment to survey her surroundings more carefully. The room was small and nearly bare. A cot in the corner, a single table with a battered chair, a chipped porcelain sink, no mirror, no window, no vents that she could see. The rough concrete walls were damp in places, and there was a musty smell that suggested earth and mold. They were underground, probably in a basement or a bunker of some sort, completely cut off. She thought about what Ian had said, what Jordan had hinted at. This was about revenge. Ian Ward had a reputation for twisted plots and manipulative schemes, especially against Mariah and those she loved. Tessa was certain Ian intended to use her and Aria as pawns in a cruel game. He would never let them go unless he got what he wanted. But what did he want? To see Mariah suffer, to break her spirit. Tessa knew Mariah would do anything to protect them, and that meant Mariah might put herself at incredible risk if it came down to a confrontation. This wasn't just about escape anymore, it was about surviving long enough to thwart whatever Ian had planned. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Maybe later she could find another way, maybe if they moved her, or maybe if a storm blew through and changed cell conditions. For now, she had to think differently. Her captors believed her helpless, but Tessa was resourceful. If there were any weaknesses in this place, loose bricks, a misaligned door hinge, a crack large enough to pry open, she would find it. As Aria's sobs lessened to quiet sniffles, Tessa rocked her gently, humming a lullaby under her breath. She needed to keep Aria calm, keep her from crying too loudly. There was no telling how Ian and Jordan would respond if the baby's cries became too persistent. They had returned the baby this time, perhaps because they realized a hysterical infant could draw attention or simply disrupt their plans. But what if next time they decided Aria was too much trouble? The thought horrified Tessa. She had to remain vigilant, keep herself and Aria safe at all costs. Hours might have passed, or maybe it was just minutes. Without windows, time felt warped and meaningless. Every so often, Tessa held her breath and listened to the silence outside the door, hoping to catch the murmur of voices or the scrape of footsteps. She wondered if Ian and Jordan were still nearby, or if they had left, confident that she wouldn't escape. Perhaps they were preparing something else, a new torment or a message to send to Mariah. Tessa's mind spun with strategies. Could she deceive them somehow, pretend to cooperate to gain their trust and escape when they slipped up? Could she find a tool to pry the lock or break the light fixture to use as a weapon? She owed it to Aria, and to Mariah, to try everything in her power to get them out of this dungeon. She looked down at her daughter's face. Aria had finally settled into a restless sleep, her tiny breaths ragged but calm enough for now. Tessa brushed a gentle kiss over her daughter's forehead. "We'll find a way out," she whispered, her voice a promise. "I won't let them tear our family apart." In that stifling darkness, Tessa clung to hope, even though there seemed to be none. She knew Mariah would never stop looking for them. Mariah would call the police, hire private investigators, and raise the alarm until the city hummed with urgency. The question was whether Tessa could hold out long enough for rescue, or perhaps rescue herself. One thing was clear, Ian Ward's cruel plan depended on Tessa's despair and fear. If Tessa refused to crumble, if she fought back with everything she had, maybe she could turn the tables. Maybe she could outsmart them. For now, though, all she could do was wait, keep Aria safe, and watch for any chance, no matter how small, to break free. She might be trapped underground, her phone a useless hunk of metal, her voice unheard by the outside world. But she still had her will, her courage, and the fierce love of a mother protecting her child.